look, 2 more movies that deserve to be nominated for Best Animated Film more than Wish. Okay, maybe Wish has gotten beaten up enough. And then it got nominated only to ensure it's going to continue to get beaten up for the next several months. It's gonna be Boss Baby all over again. I mean, not that it actually matters, we all know who's going to win. But before we get to the movies we're actually here to talk about, I need to thank my sponsor, Private Internet Access. No matter how many cat videos they put on the internet, we know how terrifying and dangerous it is. But we kind of have to live here now, and just like your real house, people can break in and steal stuff. Sounds like you need some private internet access. For the -5 of you who don't know what a VPN is yet, a virtual private network is, well, exactly what it sounds like. It is a private server that your internet connection passes through, which encrypts your data and hides your computer's IP to protect you from trackers and hackers. Basically, it's like trying to touch my cat's tummy without first putting a sock on my hand. And this is especially sketchy with public Wi-Fi, where a hacker could directly connect with anyone using the same connection. And PIA VPN has been acclaimed for being trustworthy, easy to use, and open source, and you can use it on every single one of your personal devices under one account. And with servers in multiple countries, you can bypass that pesky geo-blocking streaming services have. How dare you try to deny me Arthur Christmas during the holiday season? So if you're in need for reliable internet security, click on the link below to receive a deal of 83% off and get an additional 4 months for free. Anyway, believe it or not, I have been looking forward to the Illumination project by Ernest and Celestine's director. Illumination overall has been doing a lot better, now attempting to develop scripts that are still not particularly narratively or thematically complex, but solid. And Migration is about as good as a quintessential Illumination film has ever been. Glad to see still some evolution on their 4th purely original film. And this is easily my favorite of those. And again, perfectly within its wheelhouse, nothing terribly ambitious, just focusing on what it's good at. In this case, a movie that is actually more of a series of anecdotal comedy segments and not even really having to have much of a cohesive story much at all. And that's a good thing. Sure, the arc of Migration, maybe surrounding the father figure getting over his paranoia, maybe a little too well, but it's just a series of scenarios and gags around family trips and birds. Though I do think that might throw some people off, considering that the movie is so much feeling like just a series of events that its third act doesn't even really feel like a third act. Rather that each act has its own set piece and backdrop, and the third isn't necessarily more dramatic, though it technically is, it's just the last of them. Kinda like Encanto, where it feels like the story at some point just kind of stopped. I don't know if I can go as far as to say that it's from their European influence, but that is kind of what it reminded me of, just focusing on the gags rather than following the formula. But I honestly like that we don't have our usual typical third act bullet points like fights or dramatic reveals or races against the clock or third act breakups. Okay, there is technically a third act breakup, but this time it's an external force. It's not a fight and then a storm off. Also, Awkwafina clearly needs to play more crabby elderly characters. Or villains, clearly that's where she shines the most. It seals it with a great family dynamic. It's right on the cusp of that 90s family trend of parents and siblings spending most of their time fighting, but they manage to always bring it back to a place of genuine affection. In fact, I probably like this a little better than Ernest and Celestine 2, made by a different director. Sure, it was adorable in its own way with a dose of social commentary like the first one, but this one was a little bit more clumsy with it. But if I had a nickel for every movie featuring a bird family overcoming obstacles and almost getting eaten by someone who previously captured them, etc., etc. Potential hot take, but the original Chicken Run is probably my favorite stop-motion Aardman, and one of my absolute favorite DreamWorks. It's one of those cases where the ridiculous premise of chickens escaping their farm is taken just as seriously as a dramatic set piece as it is for a backdrop of Prison Break jokes. You feel the imminent dread and danger from the very start, and even as all of the characters are really funny. So I was looking forward to its sequel, even if it was highly unlikely for it to match the original, and that was pretty much right. Definitely not an essential follow-up, but it was certainly a fun one. This time, now being a mother, Ginger is understandably paranoid of the outside world, and predictably, ironically, tries to imprison her daughter herself to keep her safe. 2 predictable results. Understandable that teenage age of being restricted feels suffocating, even if it doesn't feel like a prison on what is clearly a solar punk paradise. Can I live here? But the true idiot move was not telling her about literally anything about the outside world, not even that humans existed, just saying, stay here because it's so awesome here. If she doesn't have a point of contrast, how is she supposed to know that this place is awesome? So of course Chicken Hilda is both frustrated at being lied to, as well as dangerously ignorant about all the things that actually could hurt her. Seriously, parents, keeping your kids ignorant is not protecting them. Given how reluctant the CGI age has been for family movies to be dark in any way, it doesn't surprise me that this movie doesn't have the same level of dread and weight as the original. While also being kinda sad that it's kind of impressive that its sequel manages to go into even the ballpark of creepy. When Chicken Hilda and Chicken Miss Frizzle, that had to have been the inspiration, get drawn into a factory farm and the gradual creepy unveiling of the unnerving details of the factory. Which of course isn't nearly as unsettling as the actual operations of a chicken factory. Heck, Miss Tweedy's reappearance would have been terrifying all by itself if the trailer hadn't spoiled it, but that's Netflix for you. And appropriately, with the first movie being a prison break film, means that this one is a heist film. Even if it doesn't hit me in the same way it did, I did genuinely have fun with this film. Aardman is as good at one-off animated gags as anyone is. Still, given that it's a nostalgic sequel, there is no reason why this shouldn't have been a theatrical release, especially given the whole lot of other nothing coming out in December. But while this is likely the least important aspect of the films, I did note how both of these movies handled the message of overprotective parenting. In my Grayson's case, it's pretty obvious from the get-go that it's not even really that the dad is overprotective, he is personally paranoid, to the point of just shutting down anybody's opposition. Then the actual road trip ends up being kind of a half and half of him being scared of things that he didn't need to be scared of versus actually potential lethal dangers. I mean, you did almost die at least a handful of occasions, but the ending sentiment is like, woo, adventure, and do we at least have something about, like, being prepared? I thought that the ending message could have at least been slightly offset with some knowledge on, why birds migrate in the first place, though admittedly for different species it's for different reasons. But part of the reason why at least some of them move is for basic things like weather, food scarcity, predators. I mean, the pond may be safe for the moment, but he clearly said that like half the things that he's worried about is weather-oriented. Like, you can still get that at the pond, buddy. At the very least, I wish there had been some sort of emphasis on the value about gaining experience and knowledge about what actually is and isn't dangerous, rather than mere speculation, as the speculation itself can drive you crazy. But on par, Illumination really doesn't tend to waste its time thinking that deeply about its themes or its messages. The animation and the comedy work, that's all that matters. So they are better, but they are still Illumination. While Chicken Run was way more classic in the shielding my child and keeping them ignorant instead of honest communication backfired, who could have seen that coming? But at least this time the thing that they were trying to protect their child from was literally dangerous and not Halloween Town exists, so you can't go out on Halloween ever. And then I like the way that it ends with both sides really understanding each other and even how they decide to address the status quo going forward. And just because it happened to line up thematically, I also wanted to mention Merry Little Batman, which is a fairly cute and funny Damian and Daddy Batman story, but with the most un-Bruce Wayne Batman ever. He is pretty much just an average suburban dad in this one. But to talk about what I want to talk about, we do need to spoil the ending. Because for most of this film, Bruce has done nothing wrong. Damian really wants to join him on Batman missions, and Bruce won't let him. Because, yeah, of course he doesn't. He's 8. Because while this Damian, I think, has been trained somewhat by his supervillain half, in this movie it leans heavily into playing him as the average suburban child that just thinks superheroes are cool and wants to be praised by Dad but doesn't understand how dangerous his dad's actual work is.
Not to mention a pretty high pain threshold. You know how many ribs I've broken? All of them.
I want to break all my ribs too!
And while this Damian is maybe a bit too young for me to call him what I usually call him, this is definitely a Damian makes everything worse story. But this is the point. Damian is in such desperation to be treated as a grown-up, or be a superhero, that he ends up doing a lot of very stupid, childish things. It even goes as far as to say that Damien's actions to get what he wants are so selfish and destructive that it makes him closer to a supervillain than a superhero. Fantastic lesson and absolutely correct. But then in the last 5 minutes, Bruce is all, whoa, cool ninja skills, I'll be your sidekick. Like, what? You were doing so well! I know, in context, Bruce is hurt, Damien is already there and isn't unskilled, but talk about a whiplash. This was the wrong time to do the parents need to trust their kids to take care of themselves story. Also, Dad, I think you like the Joker. That guy who was just trying to kill you? Okay, Lego Batman pulled this off, you cannot. And of course, this month there was also the release of The Boy and the Heron, the finalist for real this time final film of Miyazaki, which he has already recanted on, which for the first time ever gave Miyazaki the top box office spot. I will give my fuller thoughts in my end of the year list, especially since it's one of those movies where I think I need to see it twice. But I will state that as much as I want to follow Japan's lead in going in completely blind, I do think it is kind of important to let people know going in just how much of this movie, rather than a lot of his past movies, seems to be way more autobiographically inspired, not necessarily literally, and how much of its fantasy is a little bit more surreal and dreamlike than his past films. Including that his protagonist is a lot harder to kind of get into the mindset of than some of the past ones. The fantasy dream realm has a lot of imagery that reminds you of his past films, which has been argued that they are supposed to represent his films. Not everybody likes the what does it mean kind of films, but the aesthetics of this movie alone might make it worth it. So tell me what you thought of these movies, Animaniacs, and I'll see you at my worst to best list.